screen, what we're going to do is start with listings and the listing package. When you go on a listing appointment and you're ready to fill out the paperwork to list a house, this is what you're going to do and the documents you're going to use. And you can do these electronically too on DocuSign, and send them to your client. But I just want to go over the best way to fill this out. Okay, can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, so you see the exclusive right to sell property listing agreement?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, all right, so you start here on the first page here at the top with the date and the county. It's most likely going to be Tuscaloosa, but could be Pickens, Hale County, some of our surrounding counties, or any county in the state, but most likely it's Tuscaloosa County. You need to put your seller's name here. It's important that you make sure you have the legal name of your seller, so you'll know when you're filling out contracts and all how to do those, how to write their name into the document. Make sure you include all the sellers, and make sure you have all the sellers at the table when you're talking about listing their home. Like if it's a husband and wife, the wife, meets with you and you find out later the husband don't want to sell or whatever. Just make sure that you get all the sellers present when you're getting a listing agreement signed, and when you meet with them. But here you hereby grant to Keller Williams Realty Tuscaloosa, the broker, the exclusive right to list this home. You're going to put the street address, the city, the county, and the zip. The legal description here is, you can always find the subdivision if there is one. If they're just meets and bounds and not in a subdivision, then it won't be anything here. You just can put none. You can usually always find a lot number, but the rest of this is not always there. There is always a parcel ID number for a property, and those are on the tax records. Does everybody know how to get to the tax records? They are part of the MLS, and we have two that we have access now, CRS and the other one. That's a D correct. And then you're going to get the deed book or page book number and the page number. And then you're going to talk to them about RECAD. And this is you telling them the ways that you are going to represent them as a seller. They are, you're going to either be a single agent for the seller or a dual agent for them. I'm sorry, my brain's scattered this morning. But because in signing this contract with them, this listing agreement, you are going to represent them as an agent. You can't be a transaction broker for someone whose home you have listed. So, but if you then represent the buyer or anyone else in Keller Williams Tuscaloosa represents the buyer, then you're going to become what's known as the dual agent. And all y'all learn that in your 60-hour pre-license course about how RECAD is done, as soon as we finish going over this listing agreement, we'll go over the RECAD form also. It says that the seller is warranting that they have authority to sell this property and convey title to the property. And what it's asking on down here further is if you have equitable title. This is very confusing, but equitable title actually means you have less than full title to the property. So the answer is going to be no, 99% of the time here. And by initialing here on number 2, the seller is saying that they do have full title to the home and can convey it. So they're gonna initial here, here, and here. And here, number 4 is saying that they will be providing clear title to the property, that it's gonna be free of any liens or things that would prevent the home from closing. If there are any liens or judgments or anything on the property, those have to be paid off before the closing attorney can provide title insurance showing that they, have a clear title on, showing on the property after their problems that are with the title will be satisfied before the home closes, so that the buyer is then going to receive clear title to the property. Make sure that you get correct HOA info, because you need to get that from the closing attorney. Make sure you give the seller, get from the seller any HOA restrictions and covenants. Find out how much their HOA fees are, how often they're paid, whether they're mandatory. Just, take a checklist with you and make sure you get all the information on the HOA. Here's where you're going to check whether it is or is not subject to an HOA. Here on number 5 is the period of the listing agreement. Normal in our office is 6 months. So if you listed it today, that would mean that you're listing it from September 1st to, what is that, January? No, March. Oh, gosh. Through March 1st. I have a listing right now where the man is not comfortable, the seller's not comfortable with giving me 6 months. He wanted to give me 3 months, and that was fine with me. We have renewed it because it didn't sell in those 3 months, but if you're doing a good job, they'll want to renew with you. Number 6, terms and conditions under which the property is going to be offered for sale. And here's where you're going to have the sale price. This is something that you're probably not going to be able to fill out before you meet with the seller, because you're just not going to know what the sale price is going to be. But you're going to take all that information with you on the listing appointment, CMAs with all the comps and all the information in the MLS that will help you know what the home should be priced at. So, and then it's kind of a good idea to just ask the seller what he, is thinking the home is worth. so that you know just how far off he is before you give your advice and recommendation on pricing. Property is going to sell for an excess of $300,000, then he or she is gonna owe taxes to the state of Alabama. So you're either, the seller is or is not a non-resident. That's terribly worded and very confusing. But if they are an Alabama resident, then the answer here is going to be he is not a non-resident. He does, have residency in the state. Is checking this one. Is that make sense to everybody? Does you have any questions on that? Okay. Seller agrees to maintain and keep in force hazard insurance until the property is sold and closed. So the seller is going to make sure he does not withdraw insurance on the property until the closing is done and the title has been switched. So you need to remind your seller to cancel their insurance as of the closing. We're still under 6, the terms and conditions of the listing agreement, and C is talking about what loans the home will qualify for. FHA has a loan limit, so only homes that are below that ceiling of an FHA amount are going to qualify for an FHA loan. A VA loan also has loan limits, but it's really high and it's, up in the 400s. So a lot of even higher priced real estate will qualify for a VA loan. Conventional loans are going to be your most common. So you're almost always going to be able to check conventional. And of course, cash is always accepted. These other things, owner finance, and those are going to be rare and in special circumstances. But just check to see what loans work for the property.
Question, what is the FHA limit?
I knew you were going to ask me that. They just raised it again. The last time I did an FHA loan, it was $281,200, but they have upped that now. And I just talked to a lender and asked them what it is. FHA loans are less desirable for your seller. Hang on. FHA loans are going to be less desirable for your seller, especially if it's an older home, because they come with an FHA appraisal, and VA's the same way. They require certain repairs be done in order to back the loan. So, as the listing agent, you're going to be advising your seller. If you get multiple offers, the conventional loan is the easiest loan to process to get through. Of course, cash is king, so. And you'll be surprised how many times people pay cash. Okay, so then we get down to the heating, cooling, plumbing, and electrical systems, and all the appliances that are in the home that are going to convey with the home. So you're going to warranty that these things work, or if not, you're going to be selling the property as is. Most cases, the seller is going to warranty that the systems inspection then those things have to be in working order. If it's an older home, needs a lot of work, you know, there are times when you're going to want to sell that home as is. But when you say as is, the people are looking for an as is price. So just keep that in mind. Number 7 is improvements and appurtenances. This list right here is a list of things that are considered real estate. This same list is on the purchase agreement. But you need to educate your sellers on this list so they understand that these things are going to need to be left in the home, remain with the home. And I mean, it's everything from light fixtures to fans to doorbells to kitchen, built-in kitchen appliances, and anything in the kitchen like a dishwasher and stove are considered real estate. A microwave, if it's built in, is considered real estate. A refrigerator is not considered real estate. There are different garbage systems depending on where the house is, but in most cases, if it's in Tuscaloosa, Tuscaloosa, city of Tuscaloosa, the garbage cans are to remain with the home. If it's in the county, then they're under waste management, and the seller is supposed to return that garbage can to waste management when they turn off the account. Anything that's not in this list that's going to stay with the house needs to be written in here. And that would be if they're leaving the refrigerator, the washer, dryer, the plate set in the backyard, you know, a fountain, just anything that is going to stay in the house. It's not on this list. Go over this list with your seller and make sure that if there's anything on this list that's going to be excluded from the sale, you write it in here. I'm going to tell you to advise your sellers to go ahead and remove that item from the house before it's shown to buyers, because that may be the one thing that attracted them to the house, and then they find out it's not going to remain. And, you know, it could be a beautiful chandelier or whatever. If you're not going to leave the beautiful chandelier in the dining room, then tell your sellers to go ahead, take it down and put up one, because they do need to have one there. So go ahead and replace it. And, you know, it's a good time when you're talking to them about that to tell them to start thinking of that home as an asset and not their home anymore, because they're fixing to move. So just quit, you know, being personally attached to it and do what's best to get the most money in the least amount of time in the sale of the property. Any questions on that? Okay, so seller hold harmless. This is just saying that we as the broker are not responsible for any loss or damage to the property due to vandalism or pipes freezing or other damages or loss, whatever, including to, and then just read this whole paragraph. There is, if homeowner know that they need to talk to their insurance provider about getting vacancy coverage, so they can make sure if something happens to the home that they are going to be covered by their insurance. But if something happened to the home but and it wasn't noticed because it was vacant and it did a lot of damage, their policy may not pay for the damages if it was vacant for, say, a year and the insurance company didn't know about it. Okay, number 9 is lead-based paint disclosure. If the home was constructed prior to 1978, federal law requires that we provide a disclosure to buyers about lead-based paint in the home. And we'll go over that separately, but you'll want to get your seller to sign that disclosure when you list the house. If it was built in 1978, go ahead and have them do one. That's just too close to the edge for me. If it was 79 or later, I don't do one. If it was 78 or before, I do one. Law actually says prior to 78, but you want to whenever you can reduce your risk and, you know, help yourself stay out of trouble, that's what you want to do. So number 10 is wood infestation report. The seller's needs to know that when the inspections are done, the lender is going to require a wood infestation report. These are also referred to as WIRES, W-I-R, just an acronym for it. And if the seller has a termite contract with a pest control company, then that's going to be easy to do. If they do not, you need to know it, and you need to make sure that they understand that the buyer's probably going to ask them to pay to bond the house when the wood infestation report is done. And we'll look at that on the contract, the purchase agreement. So seller does or does not have a current termite contract. You find out if they do or don't. Find out who it's with. Find out if it's a retreat or a retreat and repair. And giant company, pest control company, I guess, and ask them, you know, when it renews, just get all the information that you can on it and ask them how much it's going to cost to transfer that bond, and have that in your files because you're going to need it when you get an offer on the property. So this is number 11, very important, very awkward to realtors when they're sitting with sellers. And very often a seller may, you know, ask you about your fees and whether you can do it for less. And, you know, all that is separate class on scripts and how to, you know, show the seller that you are providing top level service for them. You've got marketing fees. This fee is going to be divided with your broker and probably with a cooperating broker, meaning another company, so that you're just going to get a piece of the pie, not this whole thing. Don't think that you're going to walk away with that much money. And that usually is a surprise to a lot of sellers. And this fee, your brokerage fee, and it's kind of, it sounds better to call it that than a commission, but most people know it as a commission. But for this fee, you're going to find them a buyer who is willing and able to buy the property. And that if the property, if this listing agreement were to expire and a buyer that you were working with or a cooperating broker you were working with buys that home within 90 days and it has not been listed with another broker, then they're going to owe you this amount of money. And some people read all these little paragraphs word for word and want you to explain it. So be able to do so. And if the seller defaults and fails to close on a sale through no fault of the buyer, then he's going to owe you the commission. That doesn't usually happen, but just it's in there. So you're going to need to know how to explain that. Let's see, wait a minute. B, no brokerage fee shall be due the broker if after this listing is expired or withdrawn, the property is relisted with another licensed real estate broker and sold through that broker's exclusive right of sale. Seller agrees that the broker may engage any and all cooperating brokers to assist in marketing the property and share its brokerage fee with those brokers. In other words, you're going to need to let your sellers know that a lot of sellers say, why don't you ever show it? You've only, brought one buyer in here or only shown it once. Why is everybody else showing it and you're not? So, something that you are going to tell them that when someone calls off the sign or call you directly, then you, through all your marketing, are trying to find a buyer, but other cooperating brokers are going to very often be representing the buyer. So 12, disclosure. This is disclosing anything that is a latent defect. And as you learned in your 60-hour pre-license course, the latent defects are things that affect the health and safety of buyers. Those are not covered by caveat emptor, buyer beware. If it is something that is going to affect their health and safety and the seller knows about it, then they are required to disclose it. So when you list the house, you're going to ask them if they know of any latent defects. And don't just gloss over this, but you say, do you know of anything that would be environmental, title violations, encroachments that are known, anything like that, that is known by the seller and you've asked, then you're going to put yes or no. Usually the answer is going to be no, but if they do know of some, list them here. And then of course all these little blocks are where the sellers are going to initial. Floodplain. The seller is or is not aware that the home property is in a floodplain, and whether or not they do or do not have flood insurance. They could be in a floodplain and not have flood insurance if it was put into a floodplain map after the property was mortgaged. A lot of mortgage companies do run their properties there have mortgaged through the FEMA maps. And if they discover that a home is now in a floodplain, they may call their owner and tell them that they're going to have to get flood insurance. This is important to know. You can find this at the end of the tax records, and you're going to already know what the tax records say when you go and meet with your seller. But ask them if they're aware if they're in the floodplain and if they have flood insurance. Okay, marketing the property. Federal law prohibits discrimination in the sale or lease of real property. And then it lists the categories, and you have them initial that you told them that and inform them of that. The broker agrees to use reasonable efforts in marketing this property by putting a for sale sign in the yard, advertising it in different places, and publishing into the MLS. If they are okay with that, they need to initial, don't check mark here, they need to initial that they are okay with you doing that. Excuse me, let me. Okay. So here, the seller agrees to any inquiries that they get directly to refer those to you, that they will provide you with keys, that they will allow the use of their name and information to be used when desirable or necessary in marketing, and make the property available for showing during reasonable hours to prospective buyers, and have a lockbox placed on the property. So they need to initial all of these. This is a disclaimer about the lockbox, just letting them know that it's only used for convenience. It is not a security device, and that just aiding and it's easier to show the home. And it's hold harmless for you if something goes wrong because of that lockbox. Just reading this. Seller authorizes and instructs the broker to abide by all the rules and regulations of TAR, the Tuscaloosa Association of Realtors, and the MLS service. In other words, whatever their laws and regulations are, you have to abide by. And that's what you're explaining to them. Number 14 talks about authorizing you to have pictures made of their property and to allow them to be, those pictures to be used to market the property. This is 15 is about financial obligation. This is letting the seller know that any marketing costs are going to be paid by you and will be incurred by you, and even if the property doesn't sell, the seller is not going to be obligated to pay for any of the marketing costs. And that the seller will not, the broker will not commit the seller to any financial obligation outside the scope of the broker's license. And that might be, well, there's a whole list of things here to read. But then we get down here, and this is addressing it. And it's saying whether the seller is going to allow you to order services that might obligate them up here on their behalf. I have done that before when I've had an out-of-state seller, but avoid it whenever and at any opportunity. So you want them to initial that you may not order any services on their behalf. Then we get down here to earnest money. And I'm just going to read this because once earnest money goes into an escrow account, even if the contract clearly states who should get the earnest money if it doesn't close, we cannot remove that earnest money from our escrow account if it's in our escrow account, and any other broker that has it in his escrow account cannot remove it without the mutual agreement by buyer and seller as to who's that the contract is canceled and who's going to be paid the earnest money. So just tell this, make sure the seller understands that if the buyer walks and he clearly has been damaged and should have that earnest money, we do not have legal authority to give him that earnest money. If the buyer refuses to sign it over to him, then all we can do is leave it in the escrow account and do our best to convince the buyer to release the earnest money to the seller by working with the other agent. But this paragraph, the seller acknowledges that earnest money will be held in trust by a designated broker or other party until a contract has been accepted and signed by all parties. When a contract is accepted and signed by the parties, the earnest money is promptly deposited into an escrow account. The seller needs to know that that earnest money is going to be held while you're negotiating, but once you have an executed contract, it's going into the escrow account. In the event an offer or counteroffer is not accepted, it will be returned to the buyer without a signed release. If the contract is accepted and signed by all parties and the sale does not close, a mutual release has to be signed by all parties. The only thing that a buyer or seller can do other than reach agreement is interpleaded in civil court. In the event either buyer or seller claims the escrow funds without the agreement of the other party, any holder of the funds must retain the funds. Now, sometimes a seller may ask you to let them hold it. And if the buyer agrees to do that, then it's probably going to be non-refundable. Sometimes a agent may say they want the title company to hold it and have an agreement to who's going to get it. But if it, it's not then, unless it goes into the title company's escrow account, and then it's just the same as our escrow account. But earnest money is the biggest problem when contracts don't work out. This just says if there aren't any other agreements besides this listing agreement, and that if a suit is brought or if the broker successfully defends any action brought against the broker by the seller and is found not to be in violation of anything, the broker prevails and the seller's going to have to pay the broker's attorney fees and court costs. You kind of need to get a good script for that, kind of soften it up a little bit. But it's hold harmless. But if you are found to be in some kind of, violation, then of course they would not owe that. But let's don't ever get to this point where we're litigating and having attorney fees. And that comes with good communication. If I can't stress anything more today, communication in real estate as an agent is the most important thing you'll do. So there's clear understanding between you and your clients and or customers. Other provisions down here, write in anything that is needed, not addressed anywhere else in this agreement. One thing that could come up and is written in here sometimes, you will go and sit down with the seller and they'll say, well, John Smith has been looking at my property and said he may want to buy it. If John Smith does buy it, I don't want to pay your commission. I want you to exclude John Smith from this agreement so that if he's the one that buys it, I don't owe you anything because I was already working with him. Or they may say they have a list of buyers. That this is going to happen more with FSBOs than other sellers. But if that's the case, you can exclude buyers, but you need to put a time limit on it. And you need to make sure you get a list of the buyers so that you know specifically the names that are being excluded. You don't want that to be vague. You need it to be specific and spelled out. And I usually will try for 5 days to, to limit any exclusions. If they haven't bought it in 5 days and then they buy it, you're going to owe me a commission because by then I've had pictures made, I've got it in the MLS, I've spent money and all that. So any questions? I'm throwing a lot at you, so please feel free to speak up. This is 19 and 20, or this is the final agreement. This is harmless seller's misrepresentation. Seller agrees to defend, indemnify, and hold harmless the broker and agents for West Alabama MLS and the association for any loss of damages that are incurred due to incompleteness, inaccuracies, or any misinformation provided by the seller. So you just want to make sure that everything the seller's put in here is right. And this is where I wrote in if seller asks you to exclude names. You have to sign the listing agreement. Not if the sellers all have to sign also, but you, by law, have to also sign it. You see here it says listing agent or broker, so you can sign right there on this final page. And this listing agreement is 6 pages long. It's something you need to spend your time getting very used to. Get script partners and learn how to do the presentation of this listing agreement to sellers, because they're going to come at you with a lot of questions and you want to know the answers before you go and sit down with sellers. So are we clear? You got questions? Can we move on? Okay. If you think of something, we'll go back. All right, let's go to the RECAD. And this is going to be whether you are working with a buyer or a seller. This is the disclosure of agency and how we represent clients, customers, if they're not clients. So we can either represent them as a single agent, either the buyer or the seller, and we are advocating for that one client. And all single agents must be completely loyal and faithful to the client. Sub-agency, there's a task force to have this removed because it's not used anymore. I hope that they're going to agree to do that because it's very confusing. You just need to say, we don't use sub-agency anymore. If you have the buyer or anyone else in our company has the buyer, then you become a consensual dual agent. And that's where you're going to be representing both the buyer and the seller. And this can only be done with the written informed consent of all parties. This type of agent must also be loyal and faithful to the client, except where the duties owed to the clients conflict with one another. In other words, you might say here, if I know something about the seller situation that would hurt him, I can't share that with you. You buyer, if I know something that would hurt you in the negotiations, I can't share that with the seller without written permission. So you're still going to be loyal and faithful to your clients, and you're going to do your best to get the best deal for both of them. And you might even tell them that sometimes with just you in, negotiating, that you can come to a more mutual, satisfactory contract for both sides. If you do not represent them, then they're a customer and you can only assist them. You cannot advise them on anything. A transaction broker is not an agent and cannot perform the services of an agent. And then you get down here to explaining that. And this just says, no matter whether you are an agent or a transaction broker, you have to provide services honestly and in good faith. You have to exercise skill. You should know certain things. You will keep confidential any information gained in confidence unless disclosure is required by law or due to a client. The information becomes public knowledge or is disclosed or disclosure is authorized in writing. So just again, I'm telling you, don't share any information about your buyers and sellers. That is confidential information, and it's very important for you to maintain that trust with your clients. Number 4, present all written offers promptly to the seller. Make sure that the seller understands that when you are given a $100,000 offer on a listing, his listing that is $200,000, by law, if it's in writing, you have to present it to them. So don't get mad at you for bringing it to them, because by law you have to. And you have to answer their questions completely and accurately. Don't be afraid to say, I don't know, but I'll find out. Don't go outside your realm as a realtor. Don't become the lender. Don't become an attorney. You just do what your job is, and you refer them to the people that can help them, and make sure they understand that you can't answer that accurately, but you can point them to be an advocate for them. Just don't be the source that provided that information, because it was outside your skill as a realtor. Does that make sense? I'm assuming yes. Okay, further, if you are a licensee who is not your, if you're working with a licensee who is not your agent, these are the things that you can do as a transaction broker. Provide information about property, show them assist in writing the offer, but giving them no advice, and provide information on financing. You should choose which service you want from a licensee and sign this agreement. If you do not sign an agreement, by law, the licensee working with you is a transaction broker. And it also says here that the licensee is required by law to have this document on file, signed by the real estate agent, dated by the real estate agent, and in the real estate file for the commission to see. The seller can refuse to sign this. But another thing that the commission looks for when they audit is when the date that it was signed. Let's say you wrote a contract for these people on April 20th, and then you got this signed at closing on May 20th. That's not good, and they're not going to go along with that. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So really the recap is going to be where you start. Then you go to the actual agency agreements. This is the seller agreement where you are a single agent for the seller, and you are going to we do not do sub-agent, so we put no up here. Seller does allow us to offer buyer agency. You're going to put the percentage that you're going to pay to the buyer's agent, often referred to as the selling agent, which is confusing, but the buyer's agent or the selling agent. So you do authorize that at most likely 3%. They do allow Keller Williams to act as a transaction broker when working with a customer. That, in other words, you can work with a buyer and not, you can just get transaction broker for them. But the seller agrees that a 3% of the commission, total commission can be, or whatever's written in here, paid to the agent, you or someone else that is working with a buyer, even if they're not representing them.
I have a question.
Okay.
On the commission, so it's typically 3% for both sides. If it ever needed to be lowered, does that have to be approved by the broker?
I don't have to approve that. If you said 4% for you, 2% for the selling agent, buyer's agent, they're not going to show that property.
Right.
You see what I'm saying? They're going to find one where they're going to get paid 3%.
But if I were to say I want a 2%, I'll take a 2% commission. If you let me, or like if I list your house, I'll do a 2% commission. I would have to run that through the brokerage for permission.
No, you can reduce your commission like that. But I do not recommend it.
Okay.
You need to defend your 6% and show them why you're worth it. And if they tell you that they're interviewing other realtors who will do it for less, then you need to show them why hiring you at 6% is a better deal for them, bottom line. And there are a lot of scripts that you can learn, and we're going to be doing Ignite in a few weeks, and you're going to learn a lot about how to do these things and not feel nervous or inadequate in defending the 6% that you're asking them for. And I shouldn't even be saying 6% because you can't fix a commission, but it's what's kind of normal in our market and in most markets.
Mm-hmm.
But in answer to your question, no, you would not have to run that by me.
Okay. Thank you.
Uh-huh. The seller acknowledges that this agreement's been explained to them and is part of the exclusive right to sell listing agreement. In the event that a party for whom Keller Williams Realty Tuscaloosa is wishes to make an offer on, wait a minute, my brain went to the mothership there for a minute. In the event that a party for whom Keller Williams Realty Tuscaloosa is acting or has been requested to act as a buyer's broker or limited consensual dual agent wishes to make an offer on the property, seller does or does not authorize you to be a limited consensual dual agency. And then this paragraph right here is going to explain to them about being a limited consensual dual agent. You've already talked to them about this in the listing agreement and on the RECAD, so they should already understand about what a limited consensual dual agent is. Most sellers are going to sign this, sign a separate dual agency without objection, but some may object. The seller authorizes us to provide data to appraisers and lenders and other brokers about comps and old properties from buyers and sellers in the MLS in order to assist them in valuing the property. And what this means is a lender may call you, an appraiser may call you and say, I see where you sold 2345 Cherry Street last month. Did it have a finished basement? Because the MLS isn't clear and I'm trying to use your sale as a comp and I just need more information about it. And I'm very helpful to appraisers that call me and ask me for, and then I call and ask for information when I need it, and they're usually willing to help me. You don't want to ever provide any information that's confidential, that, you know, isn't public, that would hurt your clients ever in any way. Seller signs here. And then you want to go ahead and get them to sign the limited consensual dual agency agreement when you're listing the property, and that way you have it on file. So you're going to put the seller's name here and the property address and get them to sign it. And then when a buyer comes along that is within our brokerage, then you are going to then get the buyer to sign it. Legally, the commission will accept 2 separate dual agency agreements, one signed by the seller, one signed by the buyer, but whenever you can, please get the buyer and seller to sign the same one. So that means when you get an offer from somebody else in our office, go ahead and send them this dual agency agreement so that they can get their buyers to sign it.
Mhm.
Okay, so there is a listing for land. We won't go over that today, but it's very similar in the, you know, the wording of it. This is the lead-based paint disclosure. And this is the federal disclosure and what has to be in the file if the home was built when.
Or 1978.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
But in almost all cases, you're going to you're going to check these 2 things: that the seller has no knowledge of lead-based paint in the house, and number 2, that the seller has no reports pertaining to lead-based paint. I just don't know anybody that's ever bought a house and had those reports done. They cost a lot of money to have those inspections done, but some people do, and if they do have them, you need to provide them. So this has to be executed by both agents and both parties to the contract. The purchaser is going to acknowledge that they received this disclosure and anything up here that the seller may have had, and that they got a pamphlet saying that how to protect your family from lead in your home. We have that in our list of documents when you are representing the buyers. To provide that, always make sure you send it electronically so you can prove that you did provide it to a buyer. But the purchaser's got purchaser or plural initial here. The purchaser almost always is going to waive the opportunity to do an inspection. So he's going to check here. And then the agent has informed the seller of his obligations, and that's where you're going to sign. The seller signs here and here if there's more than one purchasers, and you as the agent and the other agent have to sign this. Is that clear?
Yes.
Okay. If you have a personal interest in the real estate that you're listing, then you need to disclose that. And this is a new document that TAR has started using. It's you can reference it in the listing agreement. So that, you know, you can say, see it form, and the licensee's personal interest is either you're the seller, an immediate family member is the seller, or any organization or business entity that you as the licensee have a personal interest. The licensee is, if you're going to purchase the property, or an immediate family member is going to be the buyer, and any other individual organization of the buyer that you have personal interest in. And then other could be whatever is needed there. The licensee has to sign this, and the buyer and seller sign, making sure that you have provided to them that you had a personal interest. If I'm working with my cousin, I disclose it. If I have any relationship to the client I'm working with, I disclose it. I mean, it's much better to disclose than not. This is just a form that this is something you can take with you to closing, and you might just, you know, people do their own of these. But you need to, it's sort of a checklist to get the termite information. Ask them if there's a survey, because very often the buyer's going to ask for a survey. So if there's already an existing survey, the seller can provide that. Buyers always want to know how old a roof is. They always want to know about the HVAC systems, fireplace information, appliances, hot water heaters, whether it's septic or sewer, whether it's when the septic was last serviced, is the garage or carport. Again, it's asking about homeowner association information here, any showing instructions that they give you. For instance, if a seller says, I need to come home at lunch and put my dogs up, so I'm gonna need so-and-so hours notice to let a buyer see the house. Keys, any showing instructions dealing with that. Mortgage information. Do you know who their mortgage is with? Because you're gonna need that. And then latent defects, again, you're asking, but you already asked that on the listing agreement. Okay, so then you as the, at listing, must provide the seller with a seller estimated net sheet. This is no longer going to be able to be used because that was part of dotloop, and it's not going to work on, let me get the, let me move this over here. Let me open up. And I have spreadsheets that I use for seller estimates and buyer estimates, and I can send y'all these. But it has formulas figured in. So you've got the seller's name and property address and purchase price, whatever the listing price is what you're going to put in here. And then it's going to, if let's just say you're going to put in 200,000, and it's going to automatically figure title insurance, deed prep. This needs to be changed to 100. I've noticed my last two closings, deed prep's gone up. Wood infestation report and transferring termite bond. And then your commission, and this one is figured on 6%. If it's not 6%, you need to make sure you change that formula in there. Prorated taxes. Mortgage payoff, if you have it, the total expenses the seller has to pay. So out of $200,000, not sure why that's not currency. Oh, this is currency. Hang on. These things get messed up on me. So, okay. Net to seller is 186,425. The way, I don't know what that is. The way these are figured, it's going to be very close, and they have to be very close or the commission doesn't accept these. So you need to make sure you update these regularly, and you can use anything from a bank to compare yours to, but you must do these separately. You have to do your own. You cannot use the bank to provide these for you. Okay. If you reduce the price, you've got to give them another one. You always have to, and when that you receive offers, whatever the offer is, if it's 190,000, you got to give them one for 190,000. If it appears on the contract that you're countering at 193, then you got to give them one for 193. So there has to be a seller estimate for the listing price and any reductions in price or price change, and every amount that shows on the purchase offer. They must be signed by one seller's good enough, if they're more than one, to sign these. You don't have to have everybody sign it as the seller, but at least one seller has to have signed these. Again, you want these dated correctly to correspond with the with the listing and the offers. If this is electronically signed the day of closing, then the commission's going to know you didn't provide this at the right time. And if you don't provide this at the right time and you're trying to get your commission check, you're scrambling around trying to get these signed after the fact, and you don't want to do that. So just go ahead and get these done. They're very helpful for the seller, and it makes them understand that even after your commission, here's what they're going to be walking away with. And they'll quit looking at those and just start looking at the bottom line. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Okay. So you have to, and in order to, when you turn in your HUD statement after closing and the commission check, then hopefully you have made sure all your documents are in there and you've submitted those for Morgan and now Jackson to check, and then he can let Liz know that the Morgan or Jackson has all the documents needed for the commission so they can go ahead and get you paid. And you're going to learn from Morgan how to do that in DocuSign. Okay. That's it for listing. Okay, so we're going to, no, that's not what I meant to order. We're going to look at any questions on these net sheets? Because they're really important, y'all. All right, let me move this thing out of the way. Put it down here. Okay, so this is a residential purchase agreement. Do y'all need, anybody need to take a break before we get started on the purchase agreement? If not, I am going to just go right ahead. I've never had so many people call me. So this is the TAR purchase agreement. I think right now, all of the brokerages are using this agreement, but just don't ever assume that that's when you get this, that, you know, you will, when you get this, make sure you read it. Don't just assume it's the standard and just scan over it. Before you talk to your sellers, you need to make sure you have carefully looked at the terms being offered in this purchase agreement. But now we're going to take off our seller hat and put on our buyer hat and represent the buyer. So you are now working in the buyer's best interest. And you're going to put the date the offer was written, the undersigned buyer's names, make sure that you put legally, and it's going to autofill better in electronics if you put like Susan Smith and then John Smith separately instead of Susan and John Smith. It's gonna, when it's time to electronically sign an initial, that's gonna help you out. Okay, so they hereby agree to purchase, and the undersigned sellers, don't leave this blank, even though you don't represent the seller. Go to the tax records, get the seller's name, put it in here. If it's wrong, then the listing agent will correct that. This property is located in the city of and the county of, whatever's appropriate. You need to verify that the address and other legal description is correct. There have been issues with this lately in misidentifying properties due to lack of information on the legal description. So get everything you can and be very accurate with it. The purchase price shall be, and you put whatever the buyer's offering. The earnest money, oh, and up here, if whenever this thing's countered, you want to just strike through and put the new purchase price on it. And you got to get initials every time it's changed. But make all the changes on the original offer. Earnest money, buyers are gonna ask you about that and ask you how much it usually is. And you will want to make sure that you, if it's 150 and under, something like that, 500 is probably fine. 1,000's more, makes it a stronger offer. Just tell them that the earnest money strengthens their offer. Of course, as you learned when you were taking your licensing, there doesn't have to be earnest money. And then did somebody ask something?
No, we're good.
You're good? Okay. So, either the listing agent, a broker, or the selling broker is going to hold this. Most cases in Tuscaloosa, selling broker is going to hold it. And they either have given you the earnest money with this when you write the offer, or they're going to deliver it and you put a date in here. Again, it's a stronger offer if you can put a copy of the earnest money with this to present to the seller, because it's a stronger offer. And you're working on on behalf of your buyer. I have really got congestion. Sorry. If the check were to be returned or is not, if the buyer fails to perform the terms of this contract, then they will have to forfeit their earnest money to the seller. But seller and buyer have to agree in writing to the cancellation of this agreement and mutually agree who's going to receive that earnest money. And I've had lawyers call me about this and say, but it very clearly states in your contract that the seller's going to receive the earnest money. And I say, yeah, I realize that, but just, if you don't believe me, call the commission. We cannot give anybody any earnest money without a mutual agreement. You can interplead it, but it's probably going to cost more to go to court and interplead it than the earnest money is. So no, it rarely is done unless there's a $10,000 earnest money check for whatever reason. Then you're gonna be definitely dealing with court. Then you get down here to number 3 about buyer financing. They're either paying cash and not having a contingency for financing, but when you have a cash buyer, they need to provide proof of funds. When there is financing, you have to check which type of loan they're going to get. And if this changes during the course of contract to close from anything that's checked on here, for instance, from conventional to FHA, you need to let the seller's agent know, because that changes things and the seller may not agree to that. They agreed to whatever you checked on here. So be sure that you let the seller know of any changes that are going to apply there. You want to, whenever possible, attach a pre-approval letter when you present the offer, because again, it strengthens your buyer's offer. And in a multiple offer situation, that's going to be helpful. If you're advocating for a buyer, then you're going to want to put 30 days in here for this contingency for financing to extend to. If I'm the listing agent, I'm going to cross through that and say, I'm not going to allow you to have 30 days to get to remove this financing contingency. I'll give you 20 days, 15 days, whatever. But if they do have 30 days and the financing falls through, then they can get their earnest money back according to the contract, because they were not able to secure financing. This is the appraisal. If the home's going to be mortgaged, the property's going to be mortgaged, it's gonna be contingent on the appraisal, because the lender's not going to agree to lend the money if it doesn't appraise for enough. But if it's cash, it could be non-contingent on an appraisal. If the appraisal is less than the purchase, then the buyer and seller have to agree to a resolution. If nothing's written in here, 5 days is the default, but it says here it must be filled in. I normally put 3 to 5 days in here. Closing, this, put a date here, on or before, don't say 30 days or whatever, put May 15th, 2000, whatever, right here, so that that's very specific and clear. I always, for my buyers, put that the property will be delivered at closing. I'm going to walk away, my buyer's going to walk away from closing with keys in their hand. If that's not, you need additional, that could be post occupancy, but avoid those kind of things whenever possible. And let me just right now tell y'all, as new agents, if you're representing a seller and the closing is Friday and Thursday, the buyers say, may I please put a few things in the house today after our final walkthrough? Say no. There's just way too much liability there. And I can tell you some stories right now about why, but we won't get into that. But as you representing the seller, you do not want that buyer to have access to putting their personal belongings in that house before closing, or having a painter go in, or anything that is going to make your sellers liable or have damage to their home. If you have a buyer, you just tell, if you're representing the buyer, say you do not want to go, there's too much liability for the seller to claim you did damage to their home by getting something in there before closing. So no, don't do that. You'll be happy, I promise. Okay, so here is the closing costs, allocation of costs. As you know, there are closing costs and there are prepaids. Seller is going to be asked to pay, normally in Tuscaloosa, owner's and mortgagee title insurance, deed prep, wood infestation report, transfer the termite bond, and prorate the taxes and HOA fees if there are any HOA fees. That's normal, and that's a good sentence and a good way to write it. If your seller is going to be asking, if your buyer is going to be asking the seller to pay closing costs and prepaids, that are above what's written here, then I want you to write it this way: seller to pay closing costs and prepaids not to exceed, and I want a number in there, not a percentage, all inclusive. Normally, the seller is, especially on some loans, they cannot exceed paying more than 3% of the seller's cost, the buyer's cost. So you, as representing the buyer, know that, and you may see what 3% is and make that what's going in there. You need to make sure, if you're representing the sellers, that if it says not to exceed $5,000, and then the seller says, well, maybe it won't be that much, it will be that much. Whatever they're agreeing to pay here, they're gonna pay. Buyer to pay the following expenses. It's okay to put remaining costs needed to close the loan. Then we get down to agency disclosure. The listing company is an agent of either the seller or a dual agent. The selling company is either an agent of the buyer or a limited consensual dual agent, or they could be a transaction broker. So you need to know that that is don't check more than one of these. Don't say you're an agent of the buyer and a dual agent. You can't be both. So only one thing checked. This is about the association fees, any rents if the home's leased, and tax proration. They're going to be prorated at time of closing. If the home is rented, then so existing leases shall be transferred to the buyer at closing, and then any rents that were received up to closing, the seller's going to get, and from closing on number 9 is to provide clear title, that they're going to convey good, clear title, free of any encumbrances. This says that, and this is, even though you've written it up here, you're going to still down here check that the owner's and mortgagee title insurance is going to be paid by the seller. You do not want enhanced title insurance, so check no there. Any questions so far? Okay, number 10, inspections. And this is where contracts go south. So if you've prepared your seller that they're going to be asked to pay repairs, then every agent in the office has called me while we've been doing this, y'all. So I just have to keep hitting decline, excuse me. So it's recommended that, we recommend that the buyers perform a professional inspection. And I always tell my sellers that if that home is not strangely unusual, there's going to be things on that inspection report, and they need to expect to be asked to repair certain things. One thing that seems to be happening a lot lately, let's say that the inspection report says that the HVAC system is in perfect working order, but it's got a 15-year lifespan and it's 15 years old. Well, that is something new the inspectors have been putting in their reports. And then buyers are saying, well, I want the seller to provide a new HVAC system because it's going to break after I buy it. That's just been coming up some lately. So y'all be prepared for that. You need for all parties to understand that the closing or delivery of possession, whichever occurs first, constitutes acceptance of this property and releases the seller, the seller's broker, and the buyer's broker from any liability for the condition of the property. Caveat emptor state, when that buyer goes to the house and finds something wrong, he has no recourse to ask the seller to do something about it. So he needs to be very sure that the home is okay and they are, they're accepting it in the condition that it's in. You're gonna very often get calls from buyers after they get to the house saying something like, he said he was gonna leave the swing set and it's gone. Okay, was it in writing? If it was, then you do have some recourse. But if not, then it was verbal and it's going to be very hard to get that swing set back. In fact, it's going to be very hard to get it back anyway. So I have worked this out in the past by just getting the seller to give the buyer some money to buy a new one. Just always work for a win-win solution to problems on contracts where everybody's going to be the winner. This says that the seller agrees that all utilities at the property will be on when the inspector goes to do the inspection. Very often a seller will turn off gas if it's not needed in the home, just to save themselves money if it's vacant. So the gas company's really good at turning it back on just temporarily for inspections to be done. So just make sure before you go that everything is on so that because the inspectors do this. Most offers will use this option, right of inspection and repair agreement. I use 16 days here, but know that that's not just getting the inspection done. That's giving a written list of repairs to the seller to ask him to fix. So you have to have the inspection and present a repair addendum to the seller within those 16 days. Some people use 14, some use 15, whatever, but 16 works for me, so I just use that. Use a separate repair addendum to list requested repairs. It's really important that you have everything in writing. Do never, ever, ever rely on a verbal conversation. Even if it's text messages, I want something signed by these people, the buyers and the sellers agreeing to things. Life's gonna be so much easier if you do. Wood infestation report, if they're getting a mortgage, they are going to require a wood infestation report. As I said, that's referred to as a wire. You'll hear that a lot. If you have the seller, then of course you by now know if they do or do not have a termite contract. I honestly think that when they revised this last year, this is a typo and they meant to say buyer does or does not know if the seller has a termite bond in place. But regardless, I don't check anything there. And I let the listing agent check that. $500 for transferring a term or putting a transferring a bond is good here. What you're saying though is that if there is not a bond, the seller agrees to having the house bonded when the wood infestation report is done. Here you're saying that the property is or is not connected to a sanitary system, meaning a sewer, and that if it's not, this is rarely checked, but this is if it's not connected to a sewer, then of course it's going to be on a septic system. And that the buyer may have a septic inspection done, but it's going to be at their expense. Lead-based paint, this comes into our disclosure. We've already gone over how that has to be filled out correctly. Survey, buyer does or does not request a survey. All inspections are the responsibility of a buyer, including payment. And you don't go to the house for inspections. You can let him in, but just, you know, don't get involved in what an inspector does. That's like getting involved in what an attorney or a lender or whoever does. Inspectors have their own you know, skills. This just says that you as the buyer are going to satisfy for yourself any zoning and, you know, any restrictions and historic district things on your own. That you're not going to be liable if they find out later that they can't put a boat in the yard because of subdivision restrictions. But you are going to provide them the HOA documents if there are some. So, and you are going to advise your buyer to read those and be familiar with them, especially if they're going to be doing something that could be frowned upon in a neighborhood. Their buyer's going to satisfy for themselves about school zoning. You've put in the MLS what the representing the what zoning is, but it could be wrong, could change. So you are going to advise your buyers to determine with the boards of education where which schools the house is zoned for. This just says that, you know, the buyer's going to satisfy themselves that all of smoke detectors and gas detectors are present. If it's a waterfront lot, then there are all kind of restrictions on where, how and where you can put docks and piers and boathouses. So they need to check with the county. City of Tuscaloosa owns most of, well, all of, I think, Lake Tuscaloosa frontage, no matter if it's in Northport or not. Short-term rentals, they're gonna have to check on their own to make sure the home can be used for short-term rentals if they plan to use it that way. Home warranty, the buyer does or does not want a home warranty. You can check home warranty prices, but you get the buyer to decide which warranty company they want to use, but you can order it and have it sent to closing. It makes your offer stronger if you put does not require a home warranty, because it's just something else you're asking the seller to take off their bottom line. But then you can use this to negotiate repairs. Okay, the HVAC system is 15 years old. It works fine. We're not going to replace it, but we will give you a warranty. So if it goes out, you have a home warranty. So when you get down here to number 17, there are three things that can happen. The seller can make all requested repairs. negotiate with the buyer about the allocation of repairs, or make no repairs. But the seller's going to have whatever's written in here to communicate back to the buyer in writing what they agree to. If you don't write anything in there, it's going to default to 2 calendar days, not business days. And I mean, I just recently had to interpret whether this meant, 2 days. If I got it on a Saturday and didn't see it till a Sunday, then when did my 2 days start? So you might want to put a couple more days in here, but if you're working for the seller, if the buyer's agent puts in here 2 days, you may want to change that to 5 days to give you time to get some estimates for some of the repairs or whatever. And then the buyer will now go back to the seller and say, okay, that's good. We'll accept that. Or, okay, you're going to do this, this, and this, but we also want you to do this. So this could go back and forth. If this is left blank, 2 calendar days is what that's going to default to. You always want to check to be agreed. Don't want to put anything in here or check buyer or seller. Check to be agreed between parties. And then you're going to write a separate repair addendum and send that. If this is hold harmless for anything that sinkholes and, synthetic stucco, you name it, read this list, become familiar with it. But what it is the buyer and seller are acknowledging and agreeing that the brokers are not responsible for any issues with these things right here. New construction only. Just take the initials out if you're doing electronics for anything that doesn't apply. Assessments, if there are any, they're going to be paid by the seller before closing. But if any assessments are put into place after closing, even if it's that night and close, the buyer is responsible. And this may be not my homeowners association has assessed homeowners to pay for streetlights or whatever they voted to agree on. This says that the seller will keep their insurance, property insurance, homeowners insurance in place. And, we went over this with the listing agreement up until closing. But just remind your seller when they leave closing to cancel it. This is that list of things that were in the listing agreement that are considered real estate. Anything that is not on this list that is going to remain needs to be written in this box. Anything that is excluded from the sale that is in this list is going to be written in here. Again, you want that to be blank whenever possible. Anything not closed, not covered elsewhere in this purchase agreement, you can write in here under special provisions. This just says if faxes and scanned signatures are accepted. This is the entire agreement. Pre-closing inspection of the property, that's also known as the final walkthrough, at the option of the buyer, that they can do a final inspection. The buyer acknowledges and agree that neither brokers or their agents are and buyers solely responsible for any inspections of the property. And there have been issues lately where buyers have done their final walkthrough and found things wrong and closing has fallen apart. So just good communication, guys. Just make sure you're communicating well with your clients and the other broker agents you're working with. The agreement acceptance date shall be the last initial or signing of this. So that's when all these things that were written in with days, that's the day that those things start. Make sure you're clear on what that date is. Sometimes you may get a separate agreement acceptance, but most people are not using that anymore. And then your buyers are going to sign it and you're going to present it to the seller. I forgot that up here under inspections, I said that this is the most commonly used, the right of inspection and repair, but they may also opt to, you know, make this offer as is, or it may be, and they're up here actually, they may have no inspection contingency, as is without right of inspection, or as is with right of inspection. In other words, they're not going to ask the seller to fix anything, but they are going to do an inspection, and if it's not satisfactory to them, then they're gonna walk away. Of course, if the seller wants to fix something, they can, but they're not being asked to. So you are now going to, you've recatted them. We've already been over this, told them how you're representing them, either as transaction broker where you're assisting them, or you're representing them as a buyer's agent or dual agent. This is your buyer agency agreement. You put the buyer's name, the date, your name, Keller Williams. I usually make these not so long because you're obligating yourself to these people as much as they're obligating themselves to you. And then we get down here to buyer acknowledges that you could be a dual agent, and you explain to them what that is, and that the buyer and seller agreed that you can be a dual agent. Inspections, it's not ever recommending that you get your own inspections done and verify anything that is important to them. The brokerage fee is paid by the seller, but there are instances where the buyer could end up having to pay you. Exclusive right to represent. Buyer agrees to conduct all negotiations for the property through the above named agent during the term of this agreement. And I could go into a lot of things here, but this is more going to happen in our training of an Ignite. I just want you to know how to use these agreements. Non-discrimination, again, you've got all your statuses here. Legal advice, if this is above your duties and skills as a real estate agent. This is the entire agreement, and then you have to sign this and the buyer signs it. And then additionally, you have to give the buyer a net sheet. So I'm going to move this out of the way and go to hang on, let's see.
Hey Nancy,
Huh?
this is Kayla speaking. You can't see me, but I'm here. Someone said today that for the next sheets, you know, in dot loop, they autofill when we put in the down, like the price. They said that you had made something similar to that.
That's what we're looking at here. Just forget what's on dot loop. They're not going to work on DocuSign. Can
Okay.
y'all see this? It says resume share, but can y'all see my screen?
No, it's still,
Why? Let's see. Sharing is paused. Why?
See it.
Where'd it go? Let's see. Okay. Okay, now I'm gonna hit share screen again. See if it works this time. There, can y'all see it?
yes.
Right.
Okay, good. All right, so this is the buyer estimate that you provide for your buyers when you write the offer, and for every offer that appears on the purchase agreement. And I want those dated appropriately. And this is a spreadsheet that we used back when I was at Duckworth Morris. It's prepared for you. Put the person's name here, property address. This is set up to default to today's date. I always, and this is set up, I have a insurance premium formula in here, a tax formula, and an interest rate that I put in here. And I worst case it because I always want my estimate to be worse than whatever they get from the bank so that they're not disappointed when they get the banks. They'll say, well, his was less than yours. But this is still going to make it very close to what the bank gives them. But let's say that the purchase price is right here. So again, let's put 200,000 in here. And these things are forever losing their currency and becoming something else. I don't know why. And separate. Okay, $200,000. Down payment, this is figured, this is C7, which is the purchase price, times 3%. That's might need to take that formula and make it 20%, 10%, 5%. But whatever the down payment is, so purchase price minus the down payment, this is what their loan is going to be. And then the formulas in here are automatically set up to calculate principal and interest payment based on 4.5%, insurance per month, and taxes per month, and PMI. Now, I have taken the formula out of this one. See, I'm forever messing these up. But there is a formula in here, but most conventional loans have a way of figuring in the PMI now, and there isn't PMI. So I've been putting 0 here for PMI. So principal and interest, insurance and taxes, this is probably going to be their monthly payment. These are estimated closing costs. Again, these things change. You might want, this one that I'm showing you right now, though. This really should be 200 for the wire. And I bet you deed prep's 50, and I have a more updated one where it's 100. Again, you want to worst case these things. But like if they're not going to get a survey, then you take out survey, and then, that would change it. You make it fit the offer. Does that make sense? And then these are closing costs. These are their prepaids. They've got to pay whatever 1 year of insurance is. And again, this has a formula in it. And 2 months of insurance, 2 months of taxes, and prepaid interest. And those things added together, their prepaids are gonna total this. So if you take their total down payment, their closing costs and their prepaids, this, and this amount added together is going to add up to this. And then that's what they are going to bring to closing. And then whatever the seller's gonna pay, I just put 0 in there right now. But if, let's say they're gonna pay $2,000 for closing, then they're gonna need to bring an estimated amount needed to close of $10,741.89. And as you can see, I figured nothing. It's all, you know, set up. And we had these in dotloop with these formulas, but they're not going to transfer over to DocuSign. So we're going to have to do these separately and then upload them into DocuSign. And it's real important that you make these a template so you don't mess up the original. But if you do, just fix it. I mess up my original all the time. And you'll want to adjust it. You might want to make this a different, you know, whatever. And so, any questions on that? But every time that there's a different, so the purchase price is going to be 200, and then the seller comes back and says, I'll sell it for 225. Then you've got to give them one for 225. And, you know, I'll pay 1,000 in closing. Then you got to change that. You got to make it work for the offer. And you've got to have one for every amount that shows up on the purchase agreement. Does that make sense, everybody? Clear as mud?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so, let's see, what else have we not looked at? That's really of this is going to be really wearing you all out. You want to get you a listing presentation and a buyer presentation so you can have their consultations and have something in front of you that helps you explain everything. And, you know, it's kind of bright and shiny with color pictures and, you know, all that. But these forms that I'm showing you today are what's required by the Real Estate Commission for audits. And the lead-based paint is required by the federal government. And I have to have all of those things in the file in order to let Liz give you your commission checks in case the auditors show up at the door. And you don't want to be chasing around doing those at the last minute. So get them in there and submit your file to compliance before closing. And then if anything's wrong or missing, you'll know it and you can provide it later. Hey, Kayla. So.
I have a few questions I can just think of off the top of my head.
Go right ahead.
One, are you gonna email that sheet?
Yeah, I'm gonna need to find my latest ones. I just, you know, I quit sharing them because we had that. And so I just need, I'm gonna make sure I give y'all the latest one.
Okay.
And mine is, I'd use MacBook, so mine's numbers, but I'll try to export it to Excel because usually Mac users and PC users can open those.
And then I might have missed it because I'm just walking in, but did you go over for net sheets, they're due at the time of it, they're not due at the time of an offer, right? They're due at counter and an accepted offer. Is that
No,
correct?
ma'am. When you write that initial offer, you hand them a net sheet at that time.
And then,
And every time another counter is made.
and
So
then,
if there are 4 different, purchase prices on the contract, you're gonna have 4 separate net sheets.
and then same for seller at the time and then every counter.
Right. And if you change the price of listing, you need to give them a new net sheet.